are we competing with the entertainment industry? When we look at physical education, right? It used to be exactly what you were saying, Mike. And I remember the days you couldn't wait for the bell to ring to get in the gymnasium to move and shoot hoops and talk to people. And now we live in a different world. We live in a world of AI. We live in a world of technology and constant notification.
Welcome to the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast, where we'll explore the evolving world of education and student well-being. I'm your host, Mike Helsby, and in Season 2, we're focused on personal well-being, self-regulation, and innovative learning strategies for school and everyday life. Whether you're an educator, parent, student, or education thinker, this podcast is for you. Join us for insightful discussions, valuable perspectives, and a fresh look at the future of learning. Let's take that step into the future of education together. Welcome back to another episode of the Braemar Life Skills Academy podcast. I'm your host, Mike Helsby, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Caleb Poulin and Ryan Fahey, both of whom are representing Physical Health and Education Canada. We'll be referring to that as PHE Canada throughout the episode. A brief explanation of the work that PHE does before I let these two lovely people explain their paths, their evolutions into these roles, and what they're doing at PHE these days. Physical Health and Education Canada is a national charitable organization founded in 1933, empowering educators and school administrators across the country to help ensure all students have the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to lead resilient, active, and healthy lives. By leading, advancing, and empowering K-12 and pre-service post-secondary PHE education with quality, evidence-based educational programming, professional development services, wise practices, and whole school health promotion efforts to support health equitably, PHE Canada is helping build a healthier, more resilient future for Canada. Physical health and education are critical aspects of a holistic education. PHE Canada supports students through a whole school community approach, offering opportunities to build the skills, confidence, values, and competencies to live well, now and for a lifetime. They do this through three main focus areas. Those are health education, helping students access, inquire into, and improve personal, interpersonal, and community health. Physical education, helping students be active, understanding the holistic benefits of physical activity and seeing themselves as competent, confident movers. And lastly, healthy schools, fostering healthy school environments where students and educational communities come together to elevate well-being in a comprehensive and integrated way. It's a beautiful mission. They're a wonderful organization. I'm hoping that's the most I'm going to be saying over the course of this conversation. I'm going to let the experts take over for the most part. Caleb and Ryan, thank you for sitting through that rather extended introduction, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Caleb, let's just start right off the bat with you. Tell the listeners about yourself, help me get to know you a little bit, and especially your role as an educator, your relationship with physical and health education especially, and how you've come to be a part of PHE Canada.
Definitely. So my name's Caleb. My pronouns are they, them. My current role with PHE Canada is I'm a lead on the engagement and knowledge mobilization team. Bit about my background is I did my undergrad at Dalhousie University in kinesiology. Being physically active has always been a large part of my life. I've grown up being involved in a variety of sports, basketball being a passion of mine, which I played in university, and then through that segued into announcing and coaching and lots of great avenues with that. And I've always been very passionate about education as well. So I went back home to North Bay, Ontario, where I'm from, and I went to Nipissing University and got my teaching degree in physical and health education, and then later specialized in special education. Thought it'd be a great combo for me. Those are both my passions. And, being in a school is something that I loved. I loved working with the staff. I loved working with students, promoting healthy and active lifestyles and living spaces, and also questioning and figuring out how can we make these spaces safer for everybody is really, really important to me. A few years ago, I then moved to Ottawa, so the unceded and traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and started a role with Physical and Health Education Canada. And I'm really excited to be here because I feel like I can bring a lot of my different backgrounds and experiences and passions into the current work that I'm doing.
Yeah, and it sounds like coming from almost a perfect place in terms of having lived and moved all over Canada. Yeah, I mean, we got Dalhousie University in Halifax. You were a basketball player there?
Yes.
Okay. I was at Memorial University in Newfoundland playing basketball,
nice.
And I don't think we ever came within 30 points of beating the Dalhousie Tigers when we played against you. So maybe I'll have a bone to pick with you after the episode, maybe. But yeah, and then the move to North Ontario, North Bay, and then back to Ottawa. So you've seen many places in this beautiful country and have influenced physical health and education in each one of those settings. So it's hard to imagine a more perfect person to talk to about physical health and education today. Ryan, let's see if you can match Caleb. Tell us all about yourself and especially how you've come to be at PHE Canada.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And it's a real honor to be here. So thanks for having Caleb and I and PHE Canada here today. I'll be quick. I guess, my love for movement and well-being really stems back to when I was a teenager. I fell in love with the sport of running from a young age. And so I was just always, I felt like I was better in school when I was more active. I was always in the gym at lunchtime. I loved my physical education classes and just had a huge love for track and field and cross country. And so I just kind of stumbled into that, and I went to university. I went to St. Francis Xavier University. So I think we'll add that to the mix of bones to pick.
I was going to say another team that I don't think we came anywhere close to beating.
Yeah. So I did my undergrad there in kinesiology, and then I stayed at the university to do my Bachelor of Education. So I did a concentration in health and physical education there. And when I left St. FX, I knew I wanted to travel. And so I had the opportunity to work in the United States. So I spent a year working in the early childhood physical literacy development space for a statewide nonprofit there. I learned a lot, I grew a lot, and it was time to travel again. So I came back to Canada, worked in Alberta, mostly in Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory, supporting wellness in schools, daily physical activity, staff well-being, and mentorship in school communities there. So I spent 2 years there, then found myself in the Middle East, where I taught at a private international school there. It was a Nova Scotia accredited school, taught grades 3 to 11 physical education. I did some coaching there as well, and again, just fell in love with traveling. My wife and I ended up moving to Ottawa from Abu Dhabi, and so we spent the last 4 years there in Ottawa, where I've been working with Physical and Health Education Canada, supporting healthy schools, and I can dive into that later with some of the work that we're up to. But more recently, we've had the opportunity to move to where my wife is originally from, which is called Abdiquit, also known as Prince Edward Island. So I'm coming to you remotely from Abdiquit. I absolutely love it. It's a little cold here in the winter, but absolutely incredible in the summer. So it's just awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Wow. Well, we're so happy to have you here, and that's an incredible journey you've just recounted. Yes. Also, it strikes me that when talking about physical health education coast to coast, we are representing that quite well today. I'm out here in Vancouver, British Columbia. We got an East Coaster out in PEI, and right smack in the middle, Caleb in Ottawa. So this is as appropriate as it gets, I think. I want to set the stage a little bit, talking about broadly the history and the mission of PHE Canada, and then getting into how things have evolved and your current roles there and what you're seeing and hoping for in the future. Just to help the listeners out who may be wondering about some of the topics we're going to be talking about today, a lot of our experiences, some of which you've just recounted in our earliest education, especially in those phys ed classes, was limited to something like go play a sport for 2 weeks, and then after that 2 weeks we're going to throw different sized balls out onto the court and you're going to play a different sport. And then maybe, in my own experience, I don't know if this resonates with you, we had a little bit of like weightlifting training, a little bit of talk about how the bones are connected with each other, and we had to name like 10 of them, and then how the muscles work a little bit, and we had to name 4 or 5 of those. And then at the end of it we just played more sports, and if you were good at those sports you got a good grade, and if you were not so good at those sports, you got a not so good grade. It sounds silly. That was quite literally my experience 20 years ago in physical health education. Now, I've since become, amongst other things, a physical health educator. One of my favorite things to do is teach a kinesiology class or a PE class. And I know firsthand that the curriculum has undergone some serious improvements and some serious evolutions since then. With that as our context, can you kind of talk to us about the history of PHE Canada, the traditional roles that they've played, especially vis-a-vis school settings and school curricula, and then how things have evolved and developed since then, especially during your contact with them? Caleb, maybe I'll start with you with that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, like you said, like PHE Canada has been around since 1933, and there's been lots of changes to physical education and health education over that time. Even some of the things you were mentioning with your experience was definitely resonating with me when I think back to being in school. I was kind of nodding, going, yep. And then even being a teacher the last 6 years, still noticing some other educators delivering similar instruction to what your experience was. Mm-hmm. And I know, PHE Canada does a lot of work with the holistic approach to it and the different ways where we can create that sense of belonging with all students. You mentioned, if you were good at sports, you'd get a good grade, but that's not exactly equitable as well. And how do we make this sustainable for students over time?
PHE Canada as an organization is almost 100 years old. Even though trends have kind of come and gone within the work that we do, we've remained consistent in terms of our mission and our vision, which you talked about in the introduction. And that's just really cool to see, because sometimes, we can get kind of caught up in, are we innovative enough? Are we, disruptive enough? Are we responsive enough to the community? But then are we also at the same time remaining true to our roots in a really busy space? With other groups that might touch those subject areas or work within schools and whatnot. So I think that's something that I just wanted to highlight there as well. But, I think we've made some really good strides across Canada with curriculum, like you mentioned, to start the question. And just recently, the other day, I saw that here in the province where I'm coming in from, in Prince Edward Island, they have updated the 7 to 9 PHE curriculum, and it's great. There's some really great outcomes when we talk about holistic development and health education. Really great outcomes that now address the specific needs. So let's say, for example, substance use. There's some really great outcomes now that they're talking about it. We're addressing it in a more holistic way, even at younger ages, because we know that youth may be trying some of these things at younger ages. So that's just one example. And as a national organization, we are strong advocates for curriculum to progress and move forward. And I think that's what makes us unique too, in that, we know that education is provincial and territorial, but we are a bit separate from that. So we can support those provinces that are undergoing curriculum change, that maybe want expertise or advice, or at our Council of Provinces and Territories, as an example, we can convene thought leaders from all of those areas to say, hey, you're going through a curriculum rewrite in Saskatchewan. How was it in Manitoba? How was it in Quebec? And how can we leverage some of the learnings from that, some of the opportunities from that, to just make everything better? And so those are just some of the cool things that I think we touch at PHE Canada, and we continue to just move forward and just really lean on the community to help drive that too, which is great.
Again, it's a beautiful mission. And I mean, what's more important than bringing health, not just to the individual, but to the community? Caleb, during our pre-interview, we talked about how the UN's Sustainable Development Goals play a role in sort of framing the directions and the goals of PHE Canada. And just in a little bit of my background research, having done previous episodes with some representatives from University of Toronto's UNICEF group. Last year I spoke with the York University's Model UN president, both of them really hammering home the in-progress state of Canada's pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was looking up, I found the 2020 UNICEF report card for Canada, which states, quote, overall, Canada currently ranks 30th in child well-being among 38 of the world's richest countries. So that's 30 out of 38. The report card tells us that Canada's children are worlds apart from each other due to wide inequalities and worlds apart from the happiest, healthiest children in rich countries. If the report card ranking were a school grade, it would not be posted on the fridge. So a somewhat devastating little quip at the end there. And we are in progress. But talk to me about how the SDGs are relevant to the work that PHE Canada is doing around physical and health education, and what is our current progress towards those goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the SDGs were essentially established a while ago, and, the Canadian government committed to the global goals in 2017 with 198 other countries, and and it's definitely a privilege to say too, which I just want to acknowledge, that we are considered of the 38 more economically developed countries, especially in regard to child well-being. We know there's lots of other wars and stuff going on in the world where a lot of other children don't necessarily have privileges, or their well-being could be considered very well at the moment. But again, if we're just talking specifically to Canada, where Canada is currently really succeeding and is in regards to no poverty. But, if we look at some of the other goals, like number 4, quality education, it says that we are increasing. And in regard to, the third goal, which is good health and well-being, we're also slightly increasing. But again, like you said, compared to the other 37 economically developed countries, we were ranked 30 out of 38. Where this ties into, where PHE Canada can come in is, looking at the SDGs and the goals and where we're moving forward. That's where we stand in, like Ryan said, on a national level of supporting child well-being, physical education, health education, and healthy schools. And, we can use the SDGs to work with, to say to the government, like, hey, like, this is where we can fill this role. This is where we can help. This also supports us when it comes to getting funding and grants, because we can fill that space and support that. A main way that we can have action, our main area, would be with number 4, with quality education. And it's also, interestingly, considered the key driver for the achievement of all the other 17 goals. And, we want to make sure that there's inclusive and equitable and safe and healthy schools. And that's where we can play a role in supporting that. And again, investing in schools is considered one of the best places to promote health and well-being. If we just look at a statistical standpoint, 20% of residents in Canada are school age. 51% of residents are parents or caregivers to a K-12 student. 47% of residents aged 45 and older are grandparents, and 7% of residents are employed within the education sector.
Wow.
So whether we can directly or indirectly influence and promote health and well-being, we can have that space to contribute to.
Yeah. It's long been my thought that, to echo something you said earlier, education is at the foundation of a lot of other social dynamics, whether we're talking about poverty, employment, length and quality of life, family composition, et cetera, et cetera. Quality, access, equitable education seems to be underlying and highly correlated with positive outcomes in each of those. Which is why we're doing an education podcast and why we're all in the education sphere, right? With that said, we are dealing with a national population that is diverse in the extreme. It's perhaps the thing that Canada is known for best. And in places like Toronto, where Braemar College is located, and I've spent a lot of my education career, that diversity is on display street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood, everywhere you go and everybody you interact with. And we seem like we're doing really, really well in some spheres and have quite a lot of work to do bringing equity to other spheres. One of the other things that Caleb mentioned to me about PHE's work in regards to this is the Healthy Schools Alliance. Talk to me about the role that the Healthy Schools Alliance is playing within the context of this evolving landscape that we've been describing.
As a society, prioritizing health and well-being wasn't always the focus, and but it's definitely a need to be able to like sustainably and resiliently live an active and healthy life. And when it comes to thinking of the state of well-being in schools, there wasn't really any data essentially on that and what that looks like across Canada. And that was kind of the biggest issue. And what do we do then to prioritize health and well-beings in schools? And that's essentially where the Alliance came in. It was established and formed in 2018, and it's a Canada-wide network of organizations promoting health and well-being in school communities to improve learning and set students up for lifelong success. And with that, PHE Canada is a part of the steering committee, as well as Circle Research Labs, Ever Active Schools, and OFIA. And then, it's really important when it comes to this community building and having all these different voices at the table. So with that, there's also an advisory committee, which is made up of 8 other organizations. So it's the Canadian Healthy Schools Alliance. It's an umbrella of organizations that all have, the same vision and mission to promoting health and well-being.
A couple of things too that I'll just add to that are, there was a kind of an atmosphere in 2017, 2018 around let's work together. Mm-hmm. Because, we're typically, prior to that, you're in a sector that's very kind of siloed. So the whole goal of the Alliance was let's break down those silos. Let's work together coast to coast to coast. Let's find solutions to impact system level change. And the Alliance has made some good strides in doing that. I know we're going to talk about the standards too. But that's a big shift compared to where we were even as a sector not that long ago. So I think that's an important piece too. And the other one of the early goals of the Alliance too was we wanted to reduce duplication, and we see this everywhere. Mm-hmm. Still, I think we're still working on this. For example, in different provinces, we still call it different things when we're talking about comprehensive school health. So in Alberta, they'll say comprehensive school health. In some of the maritime provinces, they'll say health promoting schools. There's other terms that I've heard that are used as well. And so the goal of the Alliance, again, is regardless of what model we're using, no matter what we're saying, we're all rowing in the same direction. We want healthy students who are healthy learners, who are a healthier Canada, to then impact those SDGs, right? So I just want to note those two things, but yeah, we can dive into the standards in a bit.
Yeah, I hope to. So rowing in the same direction and eliminating duplication seems like a worthwhile goal in terms of creating efficiency in this, this push. But let's get specific about exactly what we're talking about when we say bringing health to a school or creating a healthy school community. As I alluded to earlier, in the past, health may have been perhaps defined in less complex terms and less interconnected terms than we're using today. It had a lot to do with perhaps physical performance. And we were using a lot of, I think, economic metrics to determine the health of a community, a person, a school, or what have you. In my experience, having taught the curriculum for a few years in the past, this conception of health is now massively blown out to include, well, a whole range of interconnected factors, including things like nutrition, mental health, social emotional health, sexual education. I could go on. how does that, and maybe this is a good way to bring in those school standards, those national healthy school standards, but talk to me about the specific goals that you've referenced previously, and are there priorities that PHE is identifying? Are there specific initiatives that are taking precedence? Are we seeing major deficits in any one of those areas, or are we really just trying to educate and promote all of them holistically all at once?
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot of different avenues that we can go, and I know Ryan does a lot of great work in regards to healthy schools and kind of focusing on those specific themes. When it does come to the well-being in a school and what to prioritize, that's a great question for them to ask, because every school in Canada has a different sense of community and a different demographic, and their needs can be different, and it's very unique to them. And that was, a part of the idea of establishing the Canadian Healthy School Standards, using a comprehensive school health framework to create these. But it essentially just aims to spark conversations and be a tipping point for schools where that community can come together and figure out what the well-being to that school looks like, and what they need to prioritize and what they need to work towards. So it really supports them with initiating that and strengthening that healthy school environment for them.
Just a couple things to add there too. So maybe at a not so much a higher level, but on the ground level, in terms of what does that actually look like. A couple things. First, part of our partnership with OFIA and Everactive Schools is supporting the national rollout of the Healthy School Certification Program. And within that Healthy School Certification Program, it's essentially how do we measure healthy schools? Because we could say, this is happening, but what gets measured, or what gets tracked gets measured. There's some sort of saying there. I'm probably not doing it justice, but the point is schools can now across the country use this tool for free, and actually year over year track their healthy school goals, and they can choose their priority areas year over year. There's 6 different priority areas that are identified when they log in. So it could be personal growth and development, it could be nutrition, it could be substance use. Whatever top 1 or 2 priorities the schools are going to focus on, they can select that. And then the remainder of the year, they're building their action plans and supporting how they're working to address those identified priorities. And then again, year over year, the data stays with the school. So even if teachers leave or a new teacher champion comes in to support the work, the data is still there year over year. So that's just something I wanted to note there. That's just a good way to measure how we're getting moving schools through their healthy school journey. And then the other thing that I think PHE Canada is doing really, really well, we have a lot of what we call innovation or innovative projects. And basically the way those roll out are, the why is the same across every school. So the why might be, we are going to address youth substance use in schools. But the how looks different. So how schools do that and what the schools end up doing look different regardless of wherever they are. So that's just been really interesting for us at PHE Canada to see. We're getting a lot of that data coming in now with some of these multi-year projects, which will be great to share back on maybe another episode. But it's just really cool to see that, like Caleb mentioned, right? Listening to the school, asking the school what they need. We're able to kind of come in with a bit of structure and then let the school just guide the work. And then we can measure that through the projects that we're working in.
It reminds me of a phrase I've just learned from Jenny Samparisi, who's doing some great work at Toronto Metropolitan University in their disabilities office. Nothing about us without us is what she emphasized. And I love that idea of not going into a school and just top downing them and saying, we know exactly what health looks like. We know what your priorities should be. Let us show you how to educate this into your student body and your staff. Rather, a collaborative process of mutual information, data collection, establishing baselines, and then working in a holistic and I think compassionate manner towards authentic goals that ring true for the community itself. That's exactly as I would have as I'd hoped to hear that things were being done, and it sounds like they are. Ryan, you emphasized whatever the phrase may be. If it gets tracked, it gets measured. And I think a lot of people maybe new to this space or just starting to find out about the current health situation, especially among young people in Canada, would be surprised to see the lack of information that was available in the past, the lack of data around a number of these metrics, be they substance use or nutrition or mental health, et cetera. But especially since the pandemic, and I'm sure you're more than aware of this, there's been a real push to understand exactly, especially the mental health and social emotional health of young people. And what's going on with the really surprising and shocking rise in reports of poor mental health outcomes, especially among teenagers. I want us to kind of take a step back and maybe just dream a little bit together in the context of what we're seeing with some of this really sad situation that's come out of the pandemic and was likely already in the works before then, but has certainly been accelerated since. What does a really healthy school look like? If we're dreaming up the ideal situation where we're addressing this and all those other vectors of health performance in the lives of the individual student and in the lives of the school community, what would we love to see in a healthy, vibrant school?
Because that's a great question. Like, what is a healthy school? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like?
Mm-hmm.
Those are often the things that I'm thinking about. With the Alliance, the Canadian Healthy Schools Alliance, within the standards, there is like 5 key touchstones that they have for that, which we can think of. One of them is a healthy school integrates policies at all action levels, taps into and leverages unique protective factors within local community and the environment before, during, and after school. A healthy school is each person within and outside of the school brings in their own knowledge and expertise and resources, and they share responsibility for supporting health and well-being of everyone involved. It also affirms diversity as a gift and engages and empowers this diversity to chart an affirming and appropriate plan. And they're able to adapt that plan when needed, right, as things change. And the last key touchstone is that a healthy school would be considered a central hub which supports lifelong health and well-being of, children and youth and staff and everybody. And those are just, again, like I said, the 5 key touchstones. What really resonates with me, though, is, the affirming diversity, right? Creating that sense of belonging in a school, being able to adapt plans as needed, that community building and capacity development as well, like bringing in other folks to support healthy schools, also establishing these policies maybe at all levels, which again is a part of the reason why the National Healthy School Standards was established. And we've talked about curriculum as well. Where does that play into, even social emotional well-being, right? Like, I know in Ontario a few years ago when the math curriculum got updated, that's a key piece, and that teachers also have to assess on is the social emotional well-being in math. Well, could that not also be included across all subjects? And then just as a school overall, that holistic approach is really important.
I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. I love his movies.
Yeah.
I just recently watched Oppenheimer. Just what a movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess my point here is...
We can talk about Tenet later and what a disaster was,
I'm
but otherwise, right there with you.
Yeah. Yeah, right? So a few years ago, back in 2019, I guess this is where I'm going. So in 2019, we were part of an initiative working alongside Halibut First Nation in Newfoundland. And we went there and we had an incredible 2-day workshop with the nation around healthy schools and healthy school certification. And there was this beautiful opening on the final day of the workshop. And these 3 individuals got up at the beginning of the day and they set the tone for the day. They played this beautiful song. It was called the Water Song. And you're not going to find it on YouTube or on Spotify or anything like that, but it was just this incredible song of telling the story of how water moves through a space and how basically by the end of the song, it's a waterfall, and it starts off as a stream. And at the end of the song, there's this beautiful crescendo that just like, gives you the chills. And I remember thinking at that point in the workshop, because then we had to follow that and get up and talk about healthy schools. And I think I literally got up after that with my colleague and said, that's what healthy schools is. It's a beautiful song. Like, picture the most beautiful song you can think of. Mm-hmm. That's what it should feel like. It should feel like this beautiful melody, and it ebbs and it flows, and it's a feeling as much as it is measured. It's an essence. And we've all walked into those spaces, and we know what that feels like. And we've also walked into spaces where that's not present. And so, I don't know if there's some research behind that, but when I think about a healthy school, I think about that song all the time. And I think about, how can we as an organization help schools be that? And, through the programs, through the standards, through all these things we do, really at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And I don't know where we launch to from there, Mike, but that's just something that came to mind.
Yeah. Oh, it's lovely. And I don't envy you the task of having to step up on a stage in front of a group immediately after a performance like that. I think you made the right move by just saying like, hey, that's it. Because you're right. A healthy school is a really difficult thing to define. It's really hard to just put the component parts down in a list on paper and say, okay, let's attack these one at a time. Let's make a hierarchy or a taxonomy. And, if we follow through with this plan, Bob's your uncle will have a healthy school. That's not how it works, right? Community is like the water that you described, a fluctuating, dynamic, ongoing, emerging quality that you feel perhaps more than you can articulate. I had Honor Stahl, a dance teacher and a choreographer and a worker in embodied environmentalism on the podcast just recently. And she talked a lot about the importance of things like finding grounding, finding synchronicity, and finding shared movement in school settings as a way to generate, the words we used were, we need school settings with more giggles. And the word you just used was, I think we can add to it, we need school settings with more chills. Right? With more of that real emotional felt vibrancy. I've been in a lot of school settings where the priority, if you were to look at it from the outside, seems to be creating sterility, creating these settings of silence and order and discipline and attentiveness. And I think we're learning enough about learning psychology, motivation, memory, the sympathetic nervous system and its role in regulating our states, that we've done a disservice to a lot of young people by creating sterile school settings. We needed a lot more giggles and a lot more chills and a lot more music and shared movement and nature and all of the things that we all recognize in our nerve endings give this life meaning and purpose. So I'm really, really happy to hear you talking about music songs and that that attitude is playing a role in some of what PHE Canada is doing. I did want to highlight, as I did earlier, we got a real serious social crisis, national crisis going on with teen mental health and social emotional health. Fortunately, awareness is being brought to that in a really powerful way, and organizations like yours are playing a key role in addressing it. Are there other challenges that get less airtime, get less attention? What are you seeing when you're talking to these schools, whether in the Alliance context or otherwise, that people maybe aren't quite as tuned into as they could be in the education sphere?
PHE Canada has recently published, a stance on that, with the gender waves that are happening in schools, right? Mm-hmm. And that can definitely play a part into folks' well-being. So it is important to figure out like how we can navigate that.
Can you talk to us about, are you seeing any examples of successes in that context? Are there spaces where communities are gathering together with compassion, with families, with young people, and understanding this, as you called it, the gender wave better?
I mean, I'm sure it can go a bit of both ways, right? Like, and again, like I said, I'm not trying to necessarily dive into a bunch of different political aspects with this. But I mean, with these waves, I am seeing, support that's coming up, and folks that are coming together, and even various organizations, across Canada, standing up and trying to speak up and support this, for children and youth who might not necessarily be able to share their voice when it comes to that, which needs to be valued and held on to. And I think that also brings back to healthy schools. You mentioned, folks coming in and kind of from like a top down approach, but there needs to be this collaborative aspect. And with that, that's where we need to honor and recognize and utilize, students' voice as well when it comes to their own well-being and their own sense of social emotional learning and what makes them feel connected and what makes them feel belonged. So, I'm not in the school space currently, but, I am seeing other schools or even school boards or so on, like trying to come together in that ways and also different ways.
For me personally, that's something I really, really try to hit home as often as possible on this podcast. We need to be listening quite a bit more to young people, and even that is a challenge that's perhaps not getting quite enough airtime these days. But Ryan, sorry to take over your space there. What else are we not seeing? What could we be doing better?
Yeah, it's a great question. A couple things. I mean, I think this is getting airtime on TV and on the news, but schools are still struggling with how to deal with it, and I think that's the vaping epidemic. We're seeing that play out in real time, and PHE Canada has been a real lead foot with one of our innovative projects to address that. And so we're in the final year of that project, and we're going to have a lot of good learnings that have already started to come out and that will come out in that report later this year. And we're seeing more schools interested in using the tools we've developed, the resource we developed, the models we've created to help support how they're going to address it. And one of the new things that we're kind of getting behind is it's called the Blueprint for Action to Address Substance Use. And so we've recently received a grant to further roll that out into schools as an approach to addressing substance use among youth. And so maybe we'll come back on next season and talk about some of that work. It's still early days, yeah. But we've seen that that's an effective approach versus just coming in as adults and saying stop doing this. It doesn't work, right? We need to work with youth, not talk at youth. And so that's something. And I think another thing that I've heard recently, and it kind of surprised me, and it really prompted Caleb and I and members of our team to really take action on this, is a lack of motivation among male identifying students in PE and in sport, specifically in the high school age, seeing a decrease in motivation and pushing themselves, wanting to participate, wanting to enroll in extracurricular sport. I've had multiple teachers and coaches come and talk to me about this just in the last year. And so we're taking action at PHE Canada. I can't say too much about what we're doing because we still have grants that need to be accepted. But
yeah.
But we do have a session coming up at our conference in Saskatoon around this topic, and we're continuing to explore bringing in other folks that work in this space to help us, to help the community with how to navigate that challenge, because it is fairly new. So I would say that those are just some other two challenges that are out there.
That's one that I hadn't, appropriate to the question I asked, I haven't heard too much about. I guess my default assumption as somebody who grew up playing sports is that sports is always going to be appealing to young people, and we're never going to have a problem motivating them to get into it, because it was my third space. Right. It was when I wasn't having success in the classroom, when things weren't going awesome with my parents or my sisters at home, as is the case for all teenagers at some point, I think, I had sports. I had the people who were involved in it. I had the discipline, the physical activity. I didn't know I was regulating my emotions in my body through it. I didn't know I was getting my sense of belonging and socialization from it. There's a little bit of psychology going on there, but it was a wonderful thing for me. And I guess because of that, I've been blind to this change in this generation. Not to dwell on it for too long, but can we maybe just go one step further? Talk to me about your intuitions, why this lack of engagement, this lack of motivation in something that has been so central to especially young male belonging culture for so long?
This is not a popular subject, but my intuition tells me that, and I've talked to teachers off the record about this. Are we competing with the entertainment industry? When we look at physical education, right? It used to be exactly what you were saying, Mike. And I remember the days, like, you couldn't wait for the bell to ring to get in the gymnasium to move and shoot hoops and talk to people. And now we live in a different world. We live in a world of AI. We live in a world of technology and constant notifications. And I'm not a parent, but I know that many students have smartphones at younger and younger ages. And the default is, be stimulated on these devices. And, is there an attention starvation happening there where if I'm not entertained in 5 minutes, I'm not going to do this? Or why would I push myself when I could just go and play this at home? And so again, I don't know if there's research out there around this, and maybe it's just my intuition, but just in conversations that I've had, I find that this is still bubbling up to the surface when we talk about motivation, specific with high school students, when there's so much else that's taking their attention away. So that's just something I've noticed.
Caleb, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, those are things I've noticed as well. I was teaching a bit before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and then also when we were returning to school. And even just throughout that time of online learning and then having students come back in the classroom, like, motivation was like, pretty bad. And then trying to motivate students, trying to even get them active, it was really hard. And I was often met with, like, the why do we have to do this? Like, I don't feel like it. I don't want to. I could just go do this, or I could go do that. And Ryan brought up a good point too with being on technology. That was a lot, I feel like, of students' lives, was learning online, being on tech. Well, what else can I do? I can't go hang out with my friends. And if I'm an only child, I'm often alone, or gonna wait for my folks at home to be done work. What do I do? So I often wonder if we even bring it back a bit, and if it's like, is it also just a disconnect with socializing? We often use our phone as a source of socializing. Do even youth, have we kind of lost the skill? Do we need to add on and build up this skill again of, building relationships? And that, I think, ties into the social emotional learning aspect and the self-regulation and all of that. I was having a difficult time with my students at that. And again, I was in a public school board and I went to a private school board. So I was in two different spaces, and it was quite similar. Even when I spoke with my teacher friends from all different parts of Canada, it was quite similar across the board. So it kind of brings up that why question again, or even the how, I guess, makes more sense. How do we support youth with this?
Yeah. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head throughout this conversation, being in conversation with these young people and really trying to figure out where their felt interests and their authentic passions lie, without making assumptions about where those might have been located in the past. I've been doing some study recently on motivation theory, and especially resonant has been self-determination theory. Academics Ryan and Deci, so a different Ryan, talking a lot about the spectrum from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation, with intrinsic being something that is at its best, at its most profound, something that is indistinguishable from the self, right? You're not motivated even to do this thing. You do this thing because it's who you are, right? It is indistinguishable from your self-perception. The spectrum goes down all the way to extrinsic, which is something like the carrot and the stick, right? Do this or else, or do this so that you can have this extrinsic reward that isn't necessarily tied to anything. Within that spectrum, there's a whole bunch of different types of motivation, including what are called identified motivation and integrated motivation, where you're sort of attaching a task to a different value. So I'm not playing basketball because I'm a basketball player. I'm playing basketball because it's healthy and I value being a healthy person. That's all of these are correlated with proportionate levels of persistence. So if you're deeply intrinsically motivated to do something, you'll basically persist at it forever. I didn't have to be told to go out to the driveway to shoot 100 jump shots when I was a teenager. It's just who I was, right? It was in my blood, right? All the way down to what I think is often used as the motivating tool by schools, either the carrot and the stick. Either you're going to get a detention if you don't do this, or we're not going to take you on this field trip, or we're going to give you a gold star or a trophy or a really high grade. Those are all rewards and punishments. Right next to that, in this self-determination theory, is something similar that happens inside us, where a sense of guilt, what we might call involved in imposter syndrome, we might call it FOMO, a fear of missing out, or maybe a sense of shame. But all of those things are at play in driving a young person to perform a prescribed task, whether it's doing their homework or studying for a test or coming out to play sports or, avoiding some behavioral issues that are causing them trouble in the hallways or the lunchroom. The problem with those motivations on the extrinsic side of the spectrum is that they're really, really good at getting someone to do something once. They're not very good at getting someone to persist in that behavior over long periods of time and turn it into a habit that is then less energy demanding, more connected with externalities and positive feedback loops, etc. And it seems like that's kind of the school go-to method for promoting what we might call healthy behaviors. Either here's a reward if you do it, or here's a punishment if you don't, or you don't want to miss out, right? This is what health and goodness looks like. If you're not doing this, then you're not healthy and good. And we instill this kind of shame-based, guilt-based motivation, which again, great at getting someone to eat their vegetables once, not great at getting them to create a garden outside where they harvest their own vegetables every day and then start sharing them with the community and eventually start educating others to do the same, which I think is the kind of integrated, healthy, community-based behavior that we're looking for. With that very long journey into self-determination theory in mind, getting towards the end of this episode, what can schools, teachers, parents, staff, faculty, administrators, etc., be doing differently instead of the guilt and the shame and the reward and the punishment? What resources can we turn to? What techniques and methods might we be using to start meeting young people where they are and presenting them with routes to motivated behaviors that will become intrinsic, integrated, and that they'll identify with for a lifetime? And
again, like incorporating students into their learning and what they're doing and making it meaningful to them, I think is what's I think it's invaluable, actually. And with another aspect where we're going right now is, again, PHE Canada's organization really values youth voice, and with that, we have our upcoming youth forum, our virtual forum, and the whole precipice of that is to create a space and a platform. It's geared right now towards grade 9 to 12 and SAGEP students across Canada to connect and share ideas even about the current or even the future state of physical and health education and what they would like to see from it. And we're hoping to use this to guide our upcoming strategic plan as well. With that, we want to create a space for youth to connect, to bring in these advocates and champions, within healthy schools, within physical and health education. And this virtual youth forum has been designed and developed collaboratively with our youth council. They're going to be delivering it to youth as well. And I hope with the results from that can also answer this question further on of, what are youth wanting right now? And maybe that can help answer that. How do we build that intrinsic aspect and what teachers can use as resources and so on. But yeah, and then my other mind also went to incorporating the student-centered learning design into classes. Yeah,
no, that was great, Caleb. So one of the key ingredients to our innovative innovation projects are these student design labs. And at the ethos of that is Dr. Adam Grant is really big on this, so I would definitely check out some of his work. Talks about groupthink or brainthink versus brainstorming. And so when you brainstorm, if the three of us are brainstorming, Mike, you might take the lead on the idea, and then maybe Caleb and I defer to that idea. And so sometimes the best idea doesn't rise to the top because the group will defer to maybe one or two strong voices in the room. Whereas a brain think is a different approach where you have individual ideation, and then you have small group ideation, and then you come together and you have kind of large group ideation. And you kind of narrow in the best ideas as you go. And so it actually leads to some really strong ideas that youth can come out with, whether it's addressing mental health, whether it's addressing food security, whatever that is. And there's a really good book called Hidden Potential by Adam Grant that talks about this in detail. It's just fascinating. Like, groupthink actually can save lives in the real world. So like, we should be doing this in schools. So that would be something I would definitely encourage educators to explore and dive into. Another one is experiential learning. I think that, once we have these experiential moments, especially in something like outdoor education, they stick with you. And like, I still remember my teacher training, kayaking in like borderline unsafe kayaking conditions on the ocean. And you had to make some key decisions, and it was part of the learning process. And I still remember fort building or shelter building in the winter and surviving in that. And so obviously those are more kind of technical and advanced skills, but even in high school, how can we have some of these experiential learning opportunities so that students can have learning moments that stick with them as they go? So that would be another one. And then I think a third thing would be kind of that on a similar wavelength, like that choose your own adventure type learning. And I think this is what we can learn from, I hate to say it, but the gaming industry is so good at this. Like, the games now are so open-ended. Yeah. They're not a closed loop. Like, you can go and create this level, you can go on this path, you can go over here. And so when the gamer takes ownership of their journey, and that keeps them engaged in the game. And if we did something similar, I know we have our curriculum and we have our outcomes and expectations, but if the students can guide that journey or their own learning journey and how they reach those goals and how they're able to articulate how they're reaching those goals, I think that can help drive some of that motivation. And so I just think those are some interesting ways that maybe we could leverage and learn from the tech industry and help enhance the education experience, right?
Yeah. Oh, man, what a great answer, and a lot of really actionable stuff. Want to make sure that we've surfaced. Adam Grant is just, a wellspring of wisdom and a real joy to listen to any chance you get. You mentioned his book, Hidden Potential. I've really enjoyed his work, and I think I know him mostly through podcast interviews, but when he talks about growth mindset, when he talks about motivation theory, and especially motivation in work setting amongst groups, so much wisdom, so many aha moments where you kind of smack yourself on the head and say, of course, when we brainstorm, the charismatic, often normative voice is the loudest and gets accepted the quickest. And we can see the results of that in all of our politics today. We're not getting the best ideas filtered in a really holistic process. We're getting, octogenarians running against one another for president in the United States, right? It's just not the best way to identify good ideas. So yeah, any educator out there, hook into Adam Grant's work. He's at Wharton, I believe, and some of the stuff around how to generate a lot of the persistence, the resilience, the curiosity that we want from our students. There are answers to be found there for sure. I love that you paired a very contemporary thinker like Adam Grant with one of our oldest and dearest pedagogical philosophers, John Dewey's experiential education, right? Like, is there anything more fundamental, anything better than the results that came out of Dewey's brain? I've seen it firsthand. As you said, it doesn't necessarily need to be on scary white waters, in the ocean in a kayak or canoe, although that's cool too if you've got the right risk management protocols in place. But when I've been in garden settings with students or in community service settings, especially when you get teenagers working with young kids, helping them with their homework or their music, or just chatting with them, these external settings, and especially when they're given a little sense of responsibility in those, we might call them co-curricular settings or extracurricular settings outside the classroom, having some agency in what they're doing. I can't recall a time where I had to use a behavior management or a motivation encouragement strategy in those settings. It comes so naturally, and there's a lesson to be learned there, I think. We're running low on time here, so before I get you out of here, I just want to give you a chance. If I'm a teacher, if I'm a parent, if I'm a student, and I want to engage more with some of the things I've heard from this podcast today, maybe it's the virtual youth forum, or maybe it's understanding a bit more of the work with the Healthy Schools Alliance, where can people take a first step towards you, towards your work, and towards PHE Canada, and what will they find there?
Definitely, we have a new journal, and I know Caleb is leading that work, and it's fantastic. The old school skill of just reading is great. And so definitely check that out. We have a ton of topics, just a ton of great voices from the community. And we've really expanded, I think, just in the last few years at PHE Canada into finding some really unique perspectives on things. And so that's captured in there. And we also have a podcast as well that folks can download, listen on their drive to work or on a prep, just at home. And so that's just kind of an easy way to plug in to PHE Canada. So those are definitely two kind of low-hanging fruit pieces, I think, that people could latch onto. But Caleb, I'm not sure if you have anything you want to add there too.
Yeah, I was going to suggest the journal, right? Like, it's a collection of featured articles, I think of blog posts, research, as well as our podcast series. And then, it just covers a lot of variety of different topics, some recent articles too, which I think our listeners might find interesting. Ways to include digital literacy in physical and health education, that holistic approach. Even not too long ago, I did an interview with Dr. Shelley Russell-Mayhew and Elizabeth Tingle, who are part of the Body Image Research Lab, and we had a great discussion on how to avoid unintended harms in schools in regard to body image, healthy eating, using a comprehensive school health approach. It was great. So I'd really recommend teachers to go and check out some of those articles. Folks too, we have a lot of great resources on our website, www.phecanada.ca, that folks can check out. We also have some upcoming events. We have our national conference in May, beginning of May, which is going to be in Saskatoon. A great way for teachers to get connected with the PHE community and to develop their pedagogy and instruction with the variety of sessions that they can be a part of. We have our Healthy Schools Forum, which will be in November, which is great. A variety of different sectors come together to meet and talk about healthy schools and what's happening right now and the future of that, which is great for folks to be involved with.
Yeah. So once again, folks, just if you're hearing stuff that you're really switched on by and you want to know more about, there's going to be a long list of show notes with links to everything that you're looking for, everything Caleb and Ryan have mentioned today. Before I get you out of here on our way out, any final messages for educators, students, or parents who are listening out there engaged in the health and well-being of their learners and their communities?
For me, especially with my teaching experience, is, reach out to folks, make sure that you're prioritizing your own well-being to the best of your abilities. If you're not able to do that, how can you also live a healthy and active life yourself, and then with that can transfer into the school. So figure out ways to prioritize your own well-being and taking care of you and, building those forms of connection. It's not always easy to do, reaching out to folks saying, hey, can we chat? Sometimes I find it's a bit easier, maybe checking on people than sharing what you might be going through, but, try and my phrase is get comfy with being uncomfy. and see sometimes where that can take you.
Well said.
Yeah, and I think just a couple things come to mind, Mike. For educators, you don't have to do everything.
Yeah.
And I think that goes in line there with what you're saying, Caleb, is, just to guard your well-being, and that's okay. And to give yourself that permission. I think for parents and especially for parents, get plugged into your schools, parent councils, parent advisory groups, whatever it is called in your region. Get involved and be a part of that school community, support those healthy school initiatives. And then for students, don't be afraid to take leadership roles. We've seen youth voices from across the country just come up with some amazing ideas, from writing letters to their ministers to getting on the radio to helping run youth council events. It's phenomenal to see, and every action counts, and there's some great people there to support you. So definitely step up and take on those leadership roles.
Well, I mean, as usual, couldn't have said it better myself. That's a lot of, yeah, no kidding. I wish I could. It's attached to a stand here. Thank you both for that. It's compassionate and wise advice, and I think well worth raising up messages like that. Exactly what we're hoping to do here on the Braemar Life Skills Academy, bringing on exactly these types of guests with exactly these types of messages. Caleb and Ryan from PHE Canada, thank you so much for being with me today.